Hello and welcome to On Boards, a deep dive at what drives business success. I'm Joe Ayoub and I'm here with my co-host Raza Shaikh. Twice a month, On Boards is the place to learn about one of the most critically important aspects of any company or organization, its board of directors or advisors, with a focus on the important issues that are facing boards, company leadership, and stakeholders.
Joe and I speak with a wide range of guests and talk about what makes a board successful or unsuccessful, what it means to be an effective board member, and how to make your board one of the most valuable assets for your organization.
Before we introduce our guest, we want to thank the law firm of Nutter, McLennan and Fish, who again sponsored our most recent On Boards Summit in their conference center in the Boston Seaport. Nutter has been an incredible partner with us in every way. We appreciate all they've done to support this podcast. Our guest today is Jonathan Foster. Jonathan is the founder and managing partner of Current Capital Partners, a mergers and acquisitions advisory, corporate management services, and private equity investing firm.
Jonathan spent a decade at Lazard, primarily focused on mergers and acquisitions, advisory work, and ultimately as managing director. He has served on more than 50 boards, including Fortune 500 companies, private companies, and companies involved in restructuring.
His book, On Board, The Modern Playbook for Corporate Governance, was published last year. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks so much for joining us today on Boards.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jonathan, tell us about your book and in particular, what you learned in writing this book. Given your extensive background with governance, I'd be particularly interested to know what you learned along the journey writing this book.
So first, the book I set out to write, because I thought it had not been written, and some publishers agreed with me, was first a contemporary history of transactions, the amazing rise of the institutional investor, and the importance of ESG, which now appears to be waning. And only with that context can you really understand today's governance, the standards, the expectations, the laws, and the requirements. You really can't talk about the duty of care and the duty of loyalty if you don't really understand the Loth-Candy case and the Van Gorkum case, for instance. And so I hope that history is not dry. It's full of anecdotes, stories, and interesting personalities. But that contemporary history really forms the background for everything governance. What did I learn? I learned that governance really is ubiquitous. And I knew that it was important for more than just public companies and value creation. But I talked to 77 people, most of whom are quoted in my book. And while I focused primarily on lawyers and bankers and judges and CEOs, I purposely went and spoke with an expert in healthcare, Mario Carbone of the famous Carbone restaurant in New York City. And I realized that Mario was as thoughtful on leadership as anybody. That Beth Daly-Ullum, one of the leading authorities on healthcare in the US, truly believes that governance of healthcare institutions has a direct impact on patient care. So what I really learned that was new, aside from some interesting details, was that governance is important in almost every organization. I hope there are lessons in my book for organizations of every kind that was focused primarily on public company oversight.
Could you expand a little about why you believe that understanding the history of corporate governance is so important for directors seated today?
You know, in my book, I say, because I honestly do recall from high school English, amazing as that sounds, that Charles Dickens once wrote, "It's in vain to recall the past unless it influenced the future." And the reality is we talk about the duty of care and the duty of loyalty as being the bedrock of being a good director. We talk about the business judgment standard, which you want to stay under, not the entire fairness standard. But I think those concepts come out of the clear blue sky, unless you understand where they came from. And the duty of loyalty comes from the Loth-Candy case back in the 30s. And the duty of care comes from the Van Gorkum case in the 80s. And I do think that you can memorize what some lawyer tells you those two duties are. But if you go back and understand the story and the judicial opinions, which are not that dry, they're kind of interesting, and the personalities of Jerome Van Gorkum and TransUnion, which led to the duty of care being defined. If you go back and actually learn about Charles Guth, who ran Loth Candy and bought the rights and the formula to Pepsi Cola, the drink we drink today, and used the candy company's people and capital to buy Pepsi for his own account.
Wow.
And he got sued. And the Delaware Supreme Court ruled back in the 30s that the duty of loyalty says you've got to look out for the company, not yourself. I truly believe we can be more informed and more effective directors if we understand the history of what led to things that we probably take for granted. And I just gave you 4 examples.
Excellent examples, by the way, especially the last couple. I think that is a must learning for anyone that joins a board. The huge number of interviews with really impressive people. What surprised you most during the interviews you conducted?
Well, one thing that surprised me in a very positive direction was I was fortunate enough to sit on the board of Wheels Up, the aviation company, with Admiral Mike Mullen,
Right.
obviously a leader of our Navy, but only the 17th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, when Admiral Mullen was done with his military career, he joined the board of General Motors, of Sprint, of Wheels Up. And I wouldn't have thought that background made a great director. I sat on the Wheels Up board with him, as I mentioned. He was a great director. Why? Well, he had great command of the room. He listened first and spoke second, which is my first rule of being a good director. When I interviewed Admiral Mullen, who I'd gotten to know reasonably well, I literally said to him, "You've been giving orders for decades. How did you become a good director?" And he said, "It was hard for me. But I learned the only path to success in the boardroom was asking questions to move the group to where I wanted to go." From the 17th leader of our military, which is 2 million people strong, that was a remarkable comment, I thought, and one that we should all take to heart as we strive to do better in whatever organization we're involved in. Listen first, ask questions, and speak when you need to.
I think that is really excellent advice, especially listen first, because active listening to me is one of the most important attributes that any board member can have. Good for him that he was able to make the transition from his role as a commander in the Army to being an active listener in the boardroom. I think that is a real treat to him.
And Joe, just to underscore the point you just made, towards the end of my book, I have 10 recommendations for good governance. As I asked people, what is the most important thing you would say to a new director? Without fail, it was go slowly, listen before you speak. If you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably not. But even if you are, if you can't move the group to your view, you're not going to succeed. Pete Stavros, head of private equity at KKR, said, listen before you speak. Charles Elson, former head of the John Weinberg Governance Center, University of Delaware, and one of the most important voices in corporate governance today, said, listen before you speak. It's a cardinal rule. I've now been on 57 boards. I try to remember that every single time I walk in the boardroom. In fact, my objective is to not say anything for the first 2 meetings. I'm just listening. You gain a lot of credibility just listening.
Jonathan, earlier when we spoke, we also talked about this thing called offboarding, because one of the things for boards is to be able to have a skill matrix and be up to date. Yet we see that board members are on boards for a really long time. It's really hard to actually offboard people from the boards. What are your thoughts on things like age limits or term limits, or how to keep the board refreshed and how to manage offboarding?
So, Roz, I'm going to disagree with your preface. I don't think it's hard to offboard somebody. You say to this person, this isn't working out. We don't need your skill set. We've asked you to improve in these two areas, and you're not doing so.
Mm-hmm.
A board fires a CEO, a CFO fires a head of finance. It can be done. On 7 occasions, I've been on a board where we had an underperforming director. Our chairman suggests to each of these people, they work on these couple of things. It was largely about being prepared, not digging into the details too much, being respectful of others. They didn't improve enough, and we asked them to not stand for nomination at the next annual meeting. A CEO is not a tenured Supreme Court justice or a tenured professor, and a director has to lead by example. I hate term limits. I think they're dumb. I've been on the board of one public company for 15 years. We've had 3 different CEOs. I think I'm a better director now than I was 15 years ago. I reluctantly have come around to believe that you do need an age limit. Now, if Warren Buffett wanted to be on your board, would you say no?
He's the example everyone cites.
Of course not.
True.
But I do think at a certain age, you are probably retired. You're probably not as current as you think you were. And I reluctantly think that generally, particularly in a public company context, we are particularly visible. 75 is probably the right age. But the thought that you're a great director in year 10, but in year 11, you should be gone because of an arbitrary term limit.
Yeah.
Do individual evaluations every year. If you're not performing in year 3, get rid of the director politely, but don't keep until you get to a term limit. That's unfair to the shareholders.
So, Jonathan, you would say that the better way for managing that effective governance would require honest evaluations, including individual evaluations, and that is what brings accountability to the boardroom. How have you seen the evaluation processes, and what are best practices that you would suggest?
So I want to preface that by saying there's no perfect answer. And the reason is only the directors are in the room all the time. So as a practical matter, only the directors can do the evaluations. Right. And it's not ideal for having the team evaluate the team. I think that the trusted general counsel or the trusted chairman who's not the CEO should inquire orally, ideally on a video conference so you can read the body language, what each director thinks of all the other directors. And you need to expect that successful people will be honest. I don't love outside services because I think it's hard to talk to somebody about difficult issues when you don't really know the questioner well. So there's lots of high quality firms. And if you want to use one of them, that's fine. I've used them before. But my preference generally is someone you know, a particularly trusted general counsel, a particularly well-regarded chairman. And I like explanations of these evaluations in the proxy statement, so they have some meaning.
I just want to jump in on that because I think you're right. I think that's part of the job of the chair and the nom-gov committee or whoever it is that's assigned to it. I wonder about the self-evaluation. By that, I mean asking other people on the board what they think. Sometimes that does work, but lots of times there are either friends on the board or people that you're in business with, et cetera, relationships that I have found impede being totally transparent about one's feeling about fellow board members. And that's why I have seen when outsiders come in, outside firms, really good ones, they can do a better job because I have seen people be more honest because it's quote unquote anonymous, whereas the chair knows, or whoever, the chair of non-gov, whoever's conducting it, will know what you think about Bob or Raza. And a lot of people don't want that. Have you experienced that?
That's a fair point, and I follow your logic, but I honestly haven't. I've actually experienced the opposite. So I had a situation a number of years ago where I was relatively young on the board of a relatively large company. And our chairman, who was a very special guy, was calling around doing individual evaluations for the first year. and he asked me about my view on the various directors. And we came to a gentleman I'll call Director X. And he said, John, I sit next to you in the board meeting, and I've seen you roll your eyes about person X. And I want to know, what do you think about person X? I've been a CEO. I'm an experienced director. I know how to handle this properly. What do you really think about person X? And I explained that he didn't pay attention. He was pecking away on his computer, clearly returning emails for a substantial portion of the meeting. I thought it was distracting and disrespectful. He said, thank you. A number of other people said that. I'm going to address it. An outsider would have no idea about person X. And I'm not going to say something that's uncomfortable more quickly to a person I don't know than a person I do know. And I knew if I wasn't honest about person X, I would lose credibility with the chairman. If I didn't answer a question about person X to an outside service, who I don't know, I'm never going to see again.
Interesting.
That's a lot easier. So again, I have high regard for some of these organizations that do this work. When they come to my boards, I greet them openly. I tell them what I think. But my preference on the margin is someone you know and trust who can elicit feedback you don't really want to give.
Thank you.
Jonathan, flipping it around the other way, what are the most reliable signs that a board is actually driving performance for companies?
Raza, it's a simple answer, but it's true. It's all about stock price performance. And the shareholders elect the board to oversee the management team. We can have a long debate about investors are too short-term oriented, too much pressure for quarterly results. You need to focus on long-term shareholder value. But the reality is, at least in the public markets, I think long-term is about a year, and your stock price has got to perform. That's the ultimate arbitrator.
So you would attribute the success of the company's stock going up to not only management, but that's a reflection on the board's performance as well.
Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the board's responsible for evaluating, compensating, and when necessary, replacing, whether through termination or natural succession, the CEO. So I don't want to take too much credit. It's all about the players, not the coach. But the coach puts the players on the field. So any good coach says, my players won the game. Or, you know what? We lost the game because my coaching was lousy. Same thing with a good board. My management team got the stock price up. Lousy performance, that's on me. Didn't move quickly enough on management, didn't ask the right questions, approved a strategy with holes in it. A board is a coach. Management team are players.
Great analogy.
So one of the things we talked about when we talked a few weeks ago was that I think you said directors need to think like an activist, but not necessarily act like one. What do you mean by that?
I mean, don't wait around for an activist to come along and propose something. You should think to yourself, so if I was an activist, I was going to take a 5-6% stake and I want to encourage change. I know the stock price is too low. Here's what to do. Wait for those folks to come around. Think like an activist. Get an outside perspective. Talk to an analyst who has a sell recommendation on your stock. And think about, what would I do if I were an activist? And then think to yourself, well, does that maximize long-term shareholder value or not? So don't always take the action an activist would take, but think about, what would an activist say? And do I think for this one company that would maximize value? That's what I mean. It's really important. It's done by some. It's not done enough.
Definitely not done enough. Great way to think about it. Do you think that activists' expectations have generally improved board decision making, or do they more often divert focus on true long-term shareholder value?
I think it's impossible to thoughtfully generalize in that way. I think that an activist is just another shareholder, but they're a really noisy shareholder most of the time. And sometimes they've got really good ideas and sometimes they don't. Let me give you an example, if I might. I'm on the board of a large auto supplier called Lear Corporation. And quite a few years ago, probably 8 or 10 years ago, an activist came along and wanted us to spin off one of our businesses and do a $3 billion stock repurchase. Well, the activist didn't realize till we explained it that by separating these businesses, at least two bad things would happen. One, there was a big tax bill on the spinoff outside the US.
Mm.
And there would obviously be incremental cost to set up a separate corporate organization. As regards the repurchase, they weren't entirely wrong. We had net cash on our balance sheet, but we're in a very cyclical industry, automotive, and by any dispassionate credit analysis, a $3 billion stock repurchase will put too much debt on the company. We had a battle, and we ultimately settled. And we agreed to a $1.5 billion stock repurchase, no spinoff. One director we picked that was new that they signed off on. So they weren't wrong. A stock repurchase was a good corporate finance move, and we were probably slow to start one. But their idea of $3 billion was insane.
Excellent.
Jonathan, I want to wrap up with two questions involving current events and governance. First, do you think CEOs should speak publicly about topics in the news? And second, how do you think boards should look at risks and opportunities presented by the meteoric rise of AI?
Wow, there's a lot in that, Raza. Let me address the first one first. Lloyd Blankfein, the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, has written a wonderful memoir, which I recently read. And he made a really important point that I've been talking about for some time, which was a lot of the credibility of a CEO comes from being the head of an organization. And the corollary, of course, is the organization should come first, not your personal opinions. I talk a lot when I speak about Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, in this regard. As many will know, Tim Cook is not only the CEO of Apple, but he's a proud and somewhat visible gay man. He must disagree with President Trump's social agenda, almost if not entirely. But he's been to the White House. He made a substantial donation to the inauguration. Apple has made a substantial donation to this new ballroom the president is building. But when we had those tragedies in Minneapolis, Cook wrote a very empathetic, moving letter to the Apple employees. And it was said that he contacted the president and said, you got to find an off-ramp here. One bad tweet from Washington, it's in your stock price plummeting. And I try to make every decision I make as a director as if my family had 100% of its money in that one company's stock. That's why I think Tim Cook is acting. That's what Lloyd Blankfein was raising. And I think that's the right answer.
That is a great answer. What about AI?
You can't go more than 15 minutes. We've gone about 17 without saying AI. You have to understand something before you can oversee something. So AI reminds me of climate a while ago.
Yeah.
ESG 6, 8 years ago. Now it's AI. We directors can't oversee it until we understand it. I've taken a couple of courses. It's on my computer. It's on my laptop. It's on my phone. I'm learning how to use it. I'm asking questions. And only by understanding it can I help my colleagues and I oversee it. So that's number one. Number two is I don't want AI anywhere near the boardroom. A boardroom is a quiet place to consider and have conversations and make decisions. I am using AI to summarize analyst reports, for example, or to go through the dependencies of a board book. If I'm pressed for time, I will be honest, for example. But I do not want boardrooms I'm in overwhelmed by data. And AI can overwhelm you with data. So maybe someday, but not today. What a board today should be doing, quite simply, in my view, is learning about it. Like we learned about climate, like we learned about ESG, and should be asking questions. How are we using it? What is our budget? Who is our leader? What is our ethics policy? And keep it out of the boardroom until we're ready to use it efficiently.
Jonathan, that's very well said. I'll say it this way, that when cybersecurity was issue of the day or was rising up, in some boards may have been a tendency of like, oh, this is our cybersecurity expert director. But for AI, you can't do that. It impacts everybody, and hence all board members should know and understand it. I'm just setting up OpenClaw to see what it does. And ultimately, it is a tool to assist the board, not a replacement of the board, at least not yet, even though Joe and I have hypothesized the 7 levels of AI replacing the entire board ultimately. But we're not there yet. For today, I think you're absolutely right that it's incumbent upon each board members and top management to know and learn about AI and what it does, to be able to understand and then be able to be equipped to kind of govern.
I would say too, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think AI is dramatically different than cyber or ESG or climate change. ESG, I don't even know where it is right now in the boardroom. It's kind of an odd thing. AI is not going away. And it's not a matter of now I understand it. I think it is happening and growing and changing at such a pace that just the very act of trying to keep up with it is very difficult. There's no easy solution to it, but I really do think that this is different from other challenges that come into the boardroom. You're the master of the history of board governance, given your book. I honestly think this might be different than almost anything that's come into the boardroom in our lifetime.
I would just make 2 points as to what you both said. Number one, I don't generally believe in functional experts on the board. I need an AI expert. I need
Yeah, I
an
don't
HR
know.
expert. What I think a board needs is successful, broad-minded business and other sorts of folks, because every director has 1 vote and every director has equal liability. So I want an AI expert running my AI group at the company on the management team working 2,000 hours a year, not just an AI expert on my board working 150 hours a year. If that AI expert is a broad-based business person who fits in well with our board and where we're trying to go, that's great. Joe, as to your point, I don't think AI is going away, but you know what? Cyber's not going away, and climate's not going away, and ESG is not going away. So I do think they're similar. Do I think AI is a bigger issue? Sure. But again, we can't oversee it until we at least get a B or B minus in the topic. That's what we should be working towards, not overwhelming ourselves with data, using it where we think it's useful.
John, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really look forward to reading your book. Thank you for joining us today on Boards.
My pleasure. Great questions. Always great to be together.
And thank you all for listening to On Boards with our guest, Jonathan Foster.
Please visit our website at onboardspodcast.com. That's onboardspodcast.com. We would love to hear your comments, suggestions, and feedback. If you're not already a subscriber, please be sure to subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember to leave us a 5-star review.
And please tune in for the next episode of On Boards. Thanks.